Hello everybody and welcome to this lesson. The topic for today's discussion is research proposal. I prepared this discussion because a lot of individuals highly needs to know about research proposal. Knowing about research proposal is a preliminary, or it is very essential to conduct. These are some of the basic research proposal contents, which starts from title, go through different sections, and ends with the appendix. Here, the main point is these are not the rule for the research proposal. The contents may differ from one research to the other. It depends on the natures of the research. I just included these contents to start with. First, let's define what research proposal means. A research proposal is a document proposing a research project. It presents the practical way in which the proposed study should be conducted. It presents or it explains how the research will be conducted. It must provide persuasive evidence showing that there is a need for the proposed study. Here, it should be persuasive for the research sponsor or for the advisor of the research or other concerned body. There should be adequate reason for the research to be conducted. Let's start with a title. A title is a summary. It summarizes the main idea of the study. The overall idea of the study is summarized in the title. The title should be fewest possible words. It should be short as much as possible, but adequately describe the overall purpose of the research. The overall purpose of the research should be described adequately, but it should be short enough. Not too broad or not too narrow in scope. It should be optimum. For example, some examples of the titles: the effect of dimensions of technology readiness on technology acceptance and empirical analysis. As you see, this is very clear and it is short but adequate to describe the purpose of the research. And the other example is assessing human resource management practice in the case of ABC company. This is also short but describe fully the purpose of the study. It describes the purpose of the study. Let's continue with background of the study. Here, key studies or existing literatures which is related to the study should be surveyed in order to identify the unknown. First, in order to know what is known in the literature, what is known in the existing literature, and then we also know what is unknown or what is the gap exists in the existing literature, or what is the problem that cannot be addressed with the current literature. We also mention about the reality on the ground about the topic. We have to mention the reality about the topic on the ground. And the background of the study also contains the objective of the study. By the way, the objective of the study, in short, is to address the problem, the identified problems. And sometimes the company background, that means the company that we are going to collect data, or the company under our study. So that company's profile may be mentioned in the background of the study. Statement of the problem. It is a concise description of the problem that needs to be addressed. It's placed just next to the background of the study. And it is a concise description. It is a brief description of the problem that needs to be addressed by the research. It provides the context for the research study. It provides a special situation or the environment that we are going to study, or the situations, different situations that make the research special. And next, from the statement of the problem, we can derive or we can develop research questions. Research questions pinpoints or specify what exactly the study tried to answer. Research questions are the focal points of any research. They are the focal points of any research. The research tries to answer those research questions, and the research questions are built up on the statement of the problem. Let's continue. Research objective. Research objective means what we expect to achieve with the project. It is our purpose to achieve with the research project. It should be stated very clearly, should be specific, achievable, and measurable. We can divide research objective as general objective and specific objectives. Here, the general objective is fully achieved through specific objectives. The specific objective is once we can achieve the specific objective, so we can achieve the general objective indirectly. Here, the main point is the specific objective, the research questions that we discussed before, and the hypothesis that shows the relationship between the dependent and dependent variable have the same concept. Specific objective, research question, and hypothesis describes the same concept. Let's see with examples. This is an example for the research questions. What is the impact of on-job training on employee performance? This is a research questions. And the next is specific objective. The specific objective, which is the same with the research questions, to examine the impact of on-job training on employee performance. By the way, the difference between these two statements is the first one is question and the second one is a statement. But they both describe the same concept. They both describe the same thing. And the last one is the hypothesis, which is also the same with the above two statements. The last one is on-job training has positive and significant impact on employee performance. All the three, the first research question, second specific objective, and the third hypothesis, explains the relationship between the two variables, that is on-job training and employee performance. So when you prepare objective, research question, and hypothesis, they should be aligned one with the other because they all describe the same thing. And next is the significance of the study. By the way, significance of the study is the importance of the study or the purpose of the study that we are going to conduct, benefit of conducting the proposed study. Actually, the benefits may be for the sponsoring organization, sponsoring organization, or for the researchers, or for the society at large. The benefits of the study may be for the sponsoring organization to solve the problem, to solve the particular problem, to solve the particular societal issues, challenges maybe, or to extend the knowledge of scholars or researchers. it should add value. The significance or the importance of the study should overweigh than that of the cost. The benefit of the study should exceed than the cost of the study. In general, there are two significant benefits for the study, for the research. One is theoretical benefit, which extends the existing knowledge, which extends the current knowledge, and which add value for the researchers, which add value for the literatures. And the other is practical significance. That means the practical contribution is the research may solve, or the purpose of the research is to solve the societal challenges or the problems of the organizations, to solve the practical problems. In general, the research contributes theoretical and practical implications. And the next is the scope of the study. By the way, this is the boundary of the study. The boundary of the study. Coverage of the study selected by the researcher. The boundary is selected by the researchers. The boundary may include the area of the study, the subject matter of the study, the time frame of the study, or the time frame that the data is collected. For example, let me give you one good example. The study is limited to examine the relationship between on-job training and employee performance, particularly in service providing firms at Addis Ababa, and the data was taken in the duration from 2018 to 2020. As you see, the scope in the case of subject matter, with regard to subject matter, the scope is limited to examine only the relationship between on-job training and employee performance. As we know, there are different factors which affect the employee performance, but here, in this case, the research is limited to examine the relationship between on-job training and employee performance. And even the data, or even it focus on service providing companies. That means the data will be collected from service providing companies. And geographically, it is constrained in Addis Ababa. It's constrained in Addis Ababa. And about the time frame, the data was collected. The data for this research purpose was collected or taken from 2018 to 2020. So this is a simple example which shows the scope of the study, the boundary of the study, which is selected by the researcher. And the next is the limitation of the study. The limitation states that the reasons which restricts the researcher not to cover wider research domain. It is states the reasons why the researcher not to cover the wider research domain. Or it specifies the constraints of the study in terms of time, maybe resources to cover wider research domain. By the way, the influence of limitation of the study cannot be controlled by the researcher. It is beyond the scope of the researcher. It is beyond the control of the researcher. For example, issues with sampling. For example, sometimes the researcher may be obliged to use smaller sample size by having insufficient resources. The researcher may use small sample size or may select purposefully. And lack of previous studies. Sometimes there may be lack of previous studies, particularly in the case of investigating new studies. investigating about new technologies or doing research about new ideas, so we may face with lack of previous studies. That is out of the control of the researcher, and access to data. Sometimes, if we are concerned about data that is particularly data which is related with privacy or which is related with the secret of the country, we may not have access to get that type of data. And there may also have time constraints. Particularly students who need to finish with 2 years, so there is a time constraint to do in-depth research. These are the limitations which are not controlled by the researcher, which is beyond the control of the researcher. And the other is organization of the study. It explains briefly how each chapter is constructed, how each content is constructed to achieve the research objective. We have to construct briefly. We have to construct each chapter briefly so as to achieve the research objective. For example, this is just as an example. You should consider this just as a simple example. The study will be organized with chapter 1 includes introduction, research objective, and so on and so on. Chapter 2 includes literature review, and so on and so on. Chapter 3 includes discusses research methodology, and chapter 4 presents result and discussion, and finally chapter 5 includes summary of the finding, conclusion, and a recommendation. You can use this just as an example. And the next is a review of related literature. By the way, this one is very important part of the research process. Conducting extensive literature review is very essential for the research. And the research and the literature should be recent. That means currently published, recent knowledge, and reliable. That is, it should be true source. We have to rely on the source. There should be a reliable source that we trust. And the other important thing is it should be related with our study, our subject of study. It should be very related. Otherwise, it is useless. Reading any literature is useless. It is essential to read only the related literatures with our study or with our topic. By conducting extensive literature review, we can get concepts already known about the topic of the study. We can get ideas, we can get good knowledge, we can gain good knowledge about the field of inquiry, We can also use this extensive review of the literature to make coherent, relevant, easily readable knowledge. By conducting this extensive review of the literature, we can make coherent, relevant, and easily readable knowledge. It is important to identify the existing gap. By the way, conducting extensive review of literature gives us to understand the current knowledge, not only the current knowledge, but also to identify the gaps, to identify what is unknown. Not only what is known, we understand what is known, but also we can identify what is not known. We can identify the gaps not yet researched so far. We can also adopt different methodologies that could be applied for our study purpose. We can, by conducting extensive review of the literature, we can adopt different techniques or different methods to conduct our study. So here the important thing is that reading several related literature which fulfills the parameter of recent, which is recent, which is reliable, and which is related with our topic of study as much as possible. You need to read several papers as much as possible, in order to do good research. For conducting a good research, it is very crucial to read several related literatures as much as possible. And the next is empirical review. Under literature review, by the way, empirical review is a research that is based on experiment or observation that is often conducted to answer a specific question or to test hypotheses. So we need to include empirical review in our review of related literature. We need to include, because it is useful in order to compare and contrast our study with that empirical review, with that previous study, with that previous similar study. And the other is conceptual framework. By the way, conceptual framework is very crucial, and it is essential, or we have to have conceptual framework for the study. A study need to have conceptual framework. So in order to develop a conceptual framework, we have to read several related literatures. Developing a conceptual framework is possible only through the existing literatures. We can develop our conceptual framework for our study based on the existing literatures. The conceptual framework illustrates what you expect to find through your research. It defines the variable and shows the relationship among the variables. It defines the basic variable. For example, if you have independent variable and dependent variable, independent means the cause, dependent is the outcome variable. So it shows the relationship, how the relationship between those variables. It defines and shows the relationship between those variables. It is very essential for the research to have a conceptual framework. By the way, it is a must to have a conceptual framework. By the way, it depends on the type of research, but majorly it is necessary to have a conceptual framework for the research. These are some of the sources of literature. We can get different literature from books by reading published articles in the journal, thesis. We can get thesis from the library, from online database, from the internet, that means conference proceedings. We can get also from different journal database like Science Direct, Web of Knowledge, Web of Science, Sage, Elsevier, Emerald, Springer, Tyler, and Francis. These are some of the sources, some of the online database that we can get articles, So we can use these types of sources for the literature, This is the very important sections of research proposal. It is very important sections of the research proposal, that is research methodology. As you know, logi is study and method is a technique, so we can define easily as the method study about how to conduct research. It is a method how to conduct research, or it is a science how to conduct research, or we can define as it is a way to systematically solve the research problem. It is how the research is done scientifically and systematically. We have to use systematic and scientific methods in order to make our research repeatable or extendable, or we have to make our research to be standardized and to be understood by other scholars. It is a specific plan or protocol for conducting a study. By the way, research methodology is among those important concepts in research methodology. These are some of them. The first one is research approach. Our research approach should be clearly mentioned in the research methodology. The approach may be quantitative or qualitative or mixed approach. It should be based on the data that we have. If we have quantitative data, we can use quantitative approach. If you have qualitative data, we can use qualitative approach. If we have both qualitative and quantitative data, so we can use mixed research approach. And the other is research design. There are three types of research design, by the way. The first one is descriptive, and the second one is explanatory, and third one is exploratory. Take care of those two research design, explanatory and exploratory. They are totally different. In the case of explanatory, we have to explain the relationship between the two variables. But in the case of exploratory, we use this research design in the case of investigating the new things or investigating new insights. When we conduct a research about new things, so we use exploratory research design. In the case of descriptive, we describe only the features of the variable, And the other is sample size determination. As we know, it is very challenging, or it is sometimes difficult or impossible to use the population as a sample size, to use the population for our study. So we have to select samples. But the main point is the sample should be a representative of the population. That means the characteristics of the sample should be the same with the characteristics of the populations. So we have to determine the sample size. There are different mechanisms to determine the sample size for our study. And the other is data collection technique. The data collection technique can be probabilistic or non-probabilistic. Probabilistic data collection means we give equal chance for all the respondents. For example, simple random technique, whereas non-probability sampling is we are not giving equal chance for the respondent. We are focusing on a particular respondent in order to get some special information. For example, purposive sampling. In order to get some in-depth information, we may choose or we may select experienced employees for an interview. And the others is reliability and validity should be checked. Reliability means persistency of the data, consistency of the data. And it should be checked with SPSS, and the value should be greater than 0.7. If the value is greater than 0.7, so it is reliable. The reliability is good. And the validity is a measure which we are going to measure. It measures what we are intended to measure, what we want to measure. And there are different types of validity, by the way: construct validity, convergent validity, discriminant validity, content validity, a lot of validity. Anyway, some of the mechanisms to increase the validity of our measures is to use or to adopt valid instruments from the previous literatures, to use valid instruments, well-known instruments from the previous literatures. And there are different tests, by the way. In addition to the reliability and validity, there are different tests. Multi-collinearity test, that means the relationship between the independent variables. And normality test, the data should be normal, distributed. The linearity test, the natures of the data, and common bias test. We have to check whether there is common bias or not, and so on. And the other is data analysis method should be mentioned clearly in the research methodology. For example, the data analysis method can be conducted with SPSS or thematic content analysis or some other software like AMOS, HLM, and so on. And the next is ethical consideration. Ethical issue related with participants' consent form, that is, which states overall purpose, the purpose and any risk or benefits of participating in the research process should be clearly stated in the consent form. And confidentiality of the participant or privacy of the participant should be kept sacred. We have to keep sacred. And the next is work schedule and budget. The work schedule and budget should be included in the research proposal. For example, if we take this as an example, the activities should be listed in one column, and the time duration required to accomplish each activity should be mentioned in the other columns like duration, and the budget required to achieve those activities should be stated here. And the other remark, for example, if there are different resources required to accomplish those activities, so we have to state here. So we have to use, by the way, tables or flowchart or graphic forms like Gantt charts in order to show the sequence and interrelationship of different activities. Work schedule shows the sequence of the tasks to be performed with an anticipated length of time and with the required budget and personnel. So this is an example for the work schedule and budget. This is another important part of the research proposal, that is references. It is very crucial, by the way. We all get those literature from references. So all the ideas taken from the literature should be cited. We have to acknowledge. And on the other side, it is not possible to write our opinion or our judgment on the research papers. So we have to take ideas from other literatures and we have to cite. As we cite in the body of the literatures, so we have to list the references. We have to list the references in the references list. And the other important thing is we have to use standardized style of referencing. There are different types of reference style, like Harvard style, ABC style, and so on. So we have to use standardized style of referencing. For example, this is the citations. The citation, Parasurman 2000. This one is the author. This is the author, and this is the year of publication, and showed that the technology readiness. And this is the idea taken from this author. Here is the citation, and in the reference list, we have to mention the reference, that is Parasurman, the author, 2000, the publication year. This is the title of the article, and this is the journal of service research, the journal, and this is the page that this specific article is found. This is the page from 307 to 320, the page that is this specific article. And the last is appendix. This is the last section in our research proposal discussion, and in the appendix, we can include copies of instruments, copies of questionnaires that will be used to collect the data, the result of the pilot study, if there are pilot tests, so we have to include in the appendix, and some application letters, letter of approval or letter of application, or participant approval forms have to be included in the appendix. If there are other forms, necessary forms, we can include in the appendix. And this is all about the proposal discussion. So if you have any question or comment, you are welcome. Have a good time. Thank you.